On the other side of the shelf, I heard breathing. I was working the nighttime inventory shift at a furniture warehouse on the outskirts of an industrial park. The kind of location that feels like it doesn't belong in any specific municipality because it is situated between three freeways. I volunteered for the work on a Tuesday in late October, since I needed the double pay. The warehouse was enormous, spanning more than 40,000 square feet, with rows of 30-foot-tall shelving units that formed winding hallways. My work was easy: check quantities, scan products, and update the system. I had previously done it during the day, but never at night or by myself. My boss had departed at approximately 11 o'clock. He guided me through the portions I needed to cover, reminding me that the facility was sealed from the inside, that all outside doors had an armed security system, and that I should contact him if something felt off. Almost as an afterthought, he added that the motion sensor lights in the rear parts were sensitive and occasionally turned on by themselves. Then he departed, and I heard his voice reverberating across the void. Everything went smoothly for the first 2 hours. Using my scanner, I counted desk lamps and office chairs as I made my way around the aisles, entering the numbers into the tablet. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed non-stop, and the warehouse was frigid, but it was tolerable. I concentrated on my work while wearing my earplugs. I arrived at the area close to the loading docks at around 1 in the morning, where the larger furniture pieces, including the couches and dining tables, were stored. Bedroom frames and sets that are still covered in plastic. I became aware of the fragrance at that point. It was weak and strange, as if someone had been eating fast food close by. The smell of fries, greasy, and something else I couldn't place. I paused and surveyed the area, but it was deserted. I reasoned that the stench might have been left over from someone eating lunch back here during the day shift. I continued working, but I turned down the music and began to focus more. 10 minutes later, I heard what sounded like a latch being tested someplace behind me. I spun around, but all I saw were rows of shelves fading into darkness. Since the lights in the far corner were meant to be motion-activated, it looked strange that they were off. The only sound I could hear as I stood motionless was the building's ventilation system humming. I went back to scanning, telling myself it was nothing, and that old buildings generate noise. However, I discovered that I couldn't recall if the lights had ever been off in that corner. I made the decision to go to a different area, nearer the main offices at the front of the warehouse. I noticed my reflection in one of the standing mirrors that were resting against a pallet as I passed them. Something about it felt off, so I quit. I stared at myself as I stood there, attempting to determine what had caused me to hesitate. Then I noticed that one of the overhead lights was swaying a little, and that I could see a portion of the aisle behind me in the reflection. There was no need for it to move, notwithstanding the lack of a draft. I didn't turn around. I simply continued to walk. After arriving in the front portion, I attempted to concentrate again on my task, but my hands were now trembling, and I continued to miscan objects. I looked at my phone. It was getting close to 2 in the morning. I still had 4 hours left. I considered giving my boss a call, but I was unsure of what to say, that I was afraid, that I had heard a sound and smelled food. Even in my own mind, it seemed absurd. The footfall came from somewhere deep in the warehouse, in the area I had just left, and they were far away, yet clearly audible. They sounded methodical and leisurely, like they weren't in a rush. Counting the steps, I froze and listened. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then they came to a halt. Without breathing, I waited. There was a long pause before I heard them once more, closer this time, moving one aisle over, but parallel to where I am. My boss had mentioned that all of the external doors were armed, and I considered the security system. The loading docks and the large roll-up doors that opened for deliveries came to mind. I tried to recall if he had mentioned those. I crouched behind a pallet of boxed desk chairs and switched off my tablet so the screen wouldn't glow. I could see 2 vacant aisles down from where I was, Once more, the footsteps had ceased. However, I could now hear something different, and it came from the aisle right in front of me. My heart was racing so much that I was afraid it would reveal who I was as I watched the opening. At the far end of the aisle, a shadow crept across the floor. It stopped, stretched for a long time in the overhead light, and finally retreated from view. I stayed put. I remained hunkered there, watching, waiting for the footsteps to resume, or for the shadow to reappear. But all that was heard was quiet. Maybe 5 or 10 minutes went by, and nothing happened. I became aware that I was holding my breath, because the air felt thicker suddenly, as if the pressure had changed. I tried to concentrate clearly while forcing myself to breathe gently and slowly. I had to reach the front door. I had to get out. With caution, I got to my feet and began walking toward the offices, keeping pallets and shelving units between me and the open aisles. I didn't switch on my tablet. I remained silent. I paused and listened every few paces. With the exception of a place above me, the warehouse was suddenly silent. The manager's office door was open when I arrived in the hallway leading to the offices. I was aware that it had previously been closed. Earlier in the evening, I had passed it twice. I felt a chill creep into my chest as I gazed at the shadowy doorway. I stayed away from it. Instead, I turned to face the front exit. The door was secured from the inside with a push-bar mechanism, and even though I knew that opening it would set off the alarm, I no longer cared. I staggered out into the parking lot after pushing the door open and pressing the bar. I hurried to my car as the chilly air reached me, fumbling with my keys and dropping them once before I could unlock the door, because my hands were shaking so much. With the door shut and the engine running, I sat in the driver's seat and gazed back at the warehouse. The alarm continued to wail, its sound harsh and unrelenting. I waited for someone to emerge, for there should have been a face in one of the windows, or a figure in the doorway, but nobody showed up. My phone rang. It was my boss. He wanted to know what had happened, why the alarm was going off, and whether I was all right. I attempted to explain, but the words came out garbled, and my voice didn't sound like mine. He instructed me to stay in my car, that someone would be there shortly, and that he was calling the police. With the doors secured and the lights on, I waited in the parking lot and watched the warehouse, waiting for any movement. Eventually, the alarm went off, and the building fell silent once more. The entire warehouse was searched by the cops when they got there. Nothing was discovered. Nothing was disturbed. No one was inside, and there were no indications of entry. However, they did discover something odd. About 20 feet from where I had been hiding, at the area where I had heard the footfall, a cardboard box was positioned in the center of the aisle. It had never been there before. I was certain of it. The box was open, and within were the remnants of a slightly heated fast food meal. For 20 minutes, the elevator had been stuck on the 4th floor. I worked the night shift at a downtown parking garage, one of those enormous 8-story concrete buildings that provided services to the financial district's office towers. My work was simple. Sit in the booth next to the door, collect money from the few visitors who came and departed during the night, and make walking rounds every 2 hours to look for problems. The salary was decent for what it was. The majority of the nights were quiet, and it was decent for what it was. After 3 months of doing it, I had never experienced any issues. On a Thursday in early November, that was altered. The nighttime attendant went as soon as I arrived, guiding me through the log, and my shift began at 11. He said that maintenance was scheduled to investigate it in the morning, after someone noticed a burnt smell near the 5th floor stairs, which was likely caused by an electrical problem. Additionally, he claimed that although the elevator had been malfunctioning and pausing on floors without anyone summoning it, it wasn't worth reporting it unless the situation worsened. Then he was gone, leaving me by myself with 700 parking spots, that echoed through the concrete floors above. It was a quiet first few hours. A few automobiles entered, and a few departed. I drank coffee, processed payments, and watched videos on my phone. I completed my first walking loop at 1:30, climbing the stairs to each floor and looking for anything out of the ordinary. Everything appeared to be normal. Oil streaks on the concrete, rows of parked cars, and flickering fluorescent lights. Sometimes, just like they always did. I detected the burning scent that the last attendant had reported when I got to the 5th floor. I couldn't identify the source, although it looked to be coming from close to the stairway, and was faint, like overheated wiring. I went back down after making a notation in the log. I returned to the booth around 3 in the morning and saw something on the security monitor. Every level of the garage had cameras, and the small screen in the booth displayed black and white feeds that changed every 30 seconds. I was half observing as the feed changed to the 4th level, and I noticed an unfamiliar automobile. It was a dark automobile parked in the far corner, and I was pretty sure I hadn't seen it before. No one had entered since midnight, according to the computer's entry log. As I waited for the transmission to return to the 4th level, I fixed my gaze on the display. When it did, the automobile was still there, merely sitting outside the camera's field of view in the shadows. I convinced myself that I had overlooked it throughout the round, been negligent or preoccupied. However, the sensation in my chest told me otherwise. I made the decision to investigate it. I walked out of the booth and up the stairs, passing the 2nd and 3rd floors. Upon arriving at the 4th floor, I opened the stairway door and entered the open area. The location of the car was just where I had seen it on the monitor. It was a dark blue sedan, about 10 years old, and it was parked at a strange angle, slightly crooked, as if someone had hurried out. Despite the overhead lights being on, I approached it slowly while holding my flashlight. The driver's side window was down approximately 2 inches when I approached. I paused a few steps away and illuminated the interior. There was nothing in the automobile. There was a jacket covering the passenger seat, but neither the front nor the rear seats were occupied. Additionally, there was a paper coffee cup on the dashboard, still standing. I touched the hood with my outstretched hand. It was warm. I took a step back and surveyed the level. Maybe 15 additional automobiles were parked there. They were all silent and gloomy. I screamed out to see if anyone was there, but all I heard was a lifeless, flat echo. I listened for a long time, but there was nothing to hear. The elevator caught my attention as I made my way back to the stairway. The elevator door's indicator light indicated that it was on the 4th level. I hadn't heard it come. I waited for the doors to open by staring at them, but they remained closed. Nothing happened when I hit the call button. The doors didn't move when I touched it again, but this time I heard. I made the decision to descend the steps once more. I had no desire to linger. I examined the security monitor once more after returning to the booth. The vehicle had vanished by the time the feed reached the 4th story after cycling through the levels. I went back through the last 10 minutes of the video and rewound it, but nothing was present. The car was parked in the corner in one shot, but 30 seconds later, there was nothing. There was no headlights, no movement, and no indication that anyone was entering or leaving. I tried to make sense of it as I sat there looking at the television. No one had left when I looked at the exit log. The entry log was identical when I looked at it once more. Since midnight, there have been no new entries. I considered giving my boss a call, but I was unsure of what to say. I considered simply going away and not returning. However, I needed the work. I made myself go another round at 4 in the morning. I rapidly ascended the steps once more, being sure to check each level. It was obvious what the 2nd level was. There was no doubt about the 3rd level. I was hesitant to open the stairs door when I got to the 4th floor. I put my ear to it and heard nothing. I shoved. It opened slowly, and I entered the room. The sedan had returned. The driver's side door was open this time, and the location and angle were the same. I stayed put. Staring at the automobile, I stood in the entryway with my hands still on the staircase door. The level briefly went dark as the overhead lights flickered once before turning back on. Something stopped me before I could turn around and head back down to the booth. I required to be aware. With my flashlight steady in my grasp, I made my way over to the car. As I approached, I noticed that the coffee cup was no longer on the dashboard, and the jacket had been removed from the passenger seat. Now the automobile has been stripped of everything personal. Nothing was visible when I shone the light into the back seat. I put my palm against the trunk to inspect it, but it was locked. Then I heard footsteps. They were approaching from behind me, close to the level's other end. Even and slowly, I turned around and looked into the rows of parked cars with my flashlight. But I saw no one. The footsteps ceased. I yelled out once more, this time in a shakier voice, to see if anyone needed assistance. There was stillness, no answer. I kept my light focused on the rows of automobiles as I retreated toward the stairway. 3 rows over, I heard and saw a car's headlights flash as I was getting close to the entrance. I dashed to the staircase. I continued sprinting till I was back in the booth after pulling the door open. With shaking hands, I secured the booth door and took a seat. I kept an eye on the displays, manually scrolling through the camera feeds to verify each level. The automobile was still parked on the 4th level, its door open, and there was no one in the area. After a few minutes of continued observation, I noticed movement on the 5th floor. I couldn't see any details because it was just a shadow moving too swiftly across the screen, close to the stairway. I gave my boss a call. I informed him that there was a car on the 4th floor that kept coming and going, that something wasn't right, and that I needed someone to come in. He urged me to complete the shift and make a report in the morning while sounding irritated and half sleepy. He told me not to worry about the occasional fault in the cameras. He hung up after that. For the remainder of my shift, I remained in the booth, viewing the monitors with the doors locked. When the day attendant showed there at 6 in the morning, I informed him everything. After listening and nodding, he went to the 4th floor to be sure. After 15 minutes, he returned and reported that there was no car, no open door, and nothing out of the ordinary. However, I discovered something on my windshield when I walked to my own car on the 2nd floor after leaving that morning. It was the identical type of paper coffee cup I had noticed on the sedan's dashboard. It was still warm, even though it was empty. While I was downstairs, someone had been in room 304. I performed the audit at night. We worked at a small highway hotel that mostly catered to truck drivers and traveling salespeople who were passing through on their route to another location. It was a 2-story building with 40 rooms, a small lobby, and a breakfast area that smelled like cleaning solution and burnt coffee. I worked from 11 p.m. till 7 a.m., and I spent the majority of that time by myself. It was an easy task. Verify that nothing went wrong, take care of the audit documentation, and check in any late arrivals. I had been doing it without any problems for 6 weeks. We only had 8 rooms filled that mid-December evening. Around midnight, I checked in the final visitor, a middle-aged woman who paid with cash and hardly made eye contact. The foyer fell silent as she grabbed her key and proceeded upstairs. I took a seat behind the desk with my laptop and began going over the daily reports. The front desk phone rang at around 2 in the morning. Anticipating a visitor requesting additional towels or a wake-up call, I answered it. However, when I picked up, the other end was silent. I hung up after saying hello twice and waiting. It was from room 304, according to the caller ID. I looked over the system. There was no one in that room. Since the morning before, it had been deserted. I double-checked the registration records while staring at the screen, but there was nothing wrong. Cleaned and designated as unoccupied was room 304. I reasoned that perhaps the phone had broken, that the line had either activated independently or crossed with another chamber. The wiring of old hotels was peculiar. I returned to my work after making a note to bring it up with maintenance. 20 minutes later, the same room's phone rang once more. This time, I picked up right away. Once more. There was only stillness, but this time I thought I heard a faint sound in the background. There was no answer when I asked if anyone was there, and if they needed assistance. After perhaps 10 seconds of being open, the call terminated. I made the decision that I had to inspect the room. Despite the fact that the hallway lights would be on, I took a flashlight and the master key card and went upstairs. The second floor was silent and dark, and as I moved along the corridor, the carpet muffled my footsteps. At the far end, right before the emergency exit, was room 304. I stopped and listened as I got to the door. There was no sound coming from within. I knocked twice, identified myself as a hotel employee, and bided my time. Nothing. I carefully opened the door after swiping the keycard. With the exception of the light from the parking lot, peeking through the flimsy drapes, the room was completely dark. I reached inside and turned on the light. The space appeared unaltered. Everything was just as housekeeping would have left it, including the bed and pillows. I went inside and searched about, making sure the closet, bathroom, and under the bed were all empty. On the nightstand, however, the phone was off the hook. The receiver was positioned in the middle of the cover on the bed. My heart began to race as I stood there gazing at it. After picking up the receiver and placing it back on the cradle, I looked around the room once more, opening drawers and searching the corners for an explanation. Nothing was present. Housekeeping must have accidentally left it off the hook, I reminded myself, because it had been that way all day, and I hadn't detected it in the system. It was illogical, but it had to make sense to me. After leaving the room, I locked the door. As I strolled back, I heard something down the hall and swiftly turned around. There was nobody in the hallway. Every door was closed. I waited for one of them to open while I stood there, but nothing happened. I looked at the security camera footage when I returned to the lobby. The hotel has 3 cameras, one in the hallway upstairs, one overlooking the parking lot, and one monitoring the front entry. I scrolled back to the moment I had gone upstairs after pulling up the hallway feed. I observed myself moving along the corridor. Open room 304, enter, and leave after a short while. Everything appeared to be normal. I went back 2 hours and fast-forwarded while observing the deserted hallway. Room 304 had not been visited by anyone. However, I later saw something at the date of the initial phone conversation. The video had a small flicker, a brief malfunction when the image briefly turned dark. The hallway was precisely the same when it returned, but it felt different for some reason. I couldn't figure out what it was. I carefully watched while I replayed the video at normal speed. I noticed it at that point. Room 304's door was slightly ajar. In the gap there was only a narrow line of blackness. After watching the video for another 30 seconds or so, the door automatically closed. I compared the call log and the timestamp. At the very instant the first call ended, the door had closed. I reclined in my chair and gazed at the screen. I considered going back upstairs to inspect the room once again, but I was unable to muster the courage. Rather, I continued to monitor the live camera video from the hallway while seated at the desk. 304's door remained closed. Nothing shifted. I heard footsteps on the stairs about 4 in the morning. I noticed a man coming down into the lobby when I looked up from my computer. Wearing pants and a frayed t-shirt, he appeared worn out. He asked if we had any ice as he approached the desk. He nodded and came over when I showed him the ice maker by the breakfast area. He returned with a tiny bucket after I heard. After thanking me, he went back upstairs. As he made his way to his room, I saw him on the hallway camera. He was lodging at 312, which was at the other end of the hallway from 304. The corridor was deserted once more when he opened his door and entered. However, room 304's door was now open. This time, it was completely open, revealing the dimly lit chamber beyond, not just an inch. With my hands clutching the edge of the counter, I got up from the desk. I waited for someone to emerge, for movement, for anything, as I gazed at the monitor. The door simply remained open. Beyond it, the room was utterly silent and black. I reached for my phone and tried to call my manager, but it ended up in voicemail. I gave the owner a try. Same outcome. I was by myself at 4 in the morning. I made myself return upstairs. I have no idea why. Perhaps I believed that something worse might occur if I disregarded it or didn't check. With my phone in one hand and my flashlight in the other, I carefully ascended the stairs. The open door at the far end of the hallway, a rectangle of blackness against the faint hallway lighting, caught my attention as I made my way to the second level. With my footsteps soundless on the carpet, I approached it. As soon as I got closer, I noticed a subtle, chemical scent that was sharper than cleaning supplies. I came to a stop a short distance from the doorway and pointed my headlamp inside. The room had the same appearance as before. Everything was set up, even the bed, but the phone receiver was once more off the hook and resting on the pillow. I heard what sounded like the heating system turning on as soon as I entered the doorway. Every door in the hallway was now open when I turned and glanced back. Every room, both inhabited and empty, standing wide open, and beyond it was blackness. I bolted. I simply dashed back to the lobby, via the stairs and out the front door into the parking lot. I stared back at the structure as I stood there in the cold, my breath visible in the air. The lights in the lobby remained on. The windows on the second floor were dark. I made a police call. I informed them that all the doors were open, that I believed someone had broken in, and that something was incorrect. They searched the entire building after arriving 15 minutes later. Nothing was discovered. Every door was locked and shut. Every guest had fallen asleep. The phone was on the hook, and room 304 was unoccupied and untouched. However, I discovered a message on the front desk when I returned inside to complete my shift. It was neatly handwritten on hotel stationery, and it just said, "Thank you for checking."